Welcome to the Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Thank you very much for this short video giving us the background of our interaction session today. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. This webinar is being organized within the framework of the series of webinars that our World Heritage Initiatives has been undertaken, especially the month of July will be busy with the series of interaction around the theme of sustainability. Today, we'll be discussing heritage and climate change, of course, under the umbrella of sustainability. You may know, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, that the UNESCO World Heritage Convention is an important international treaty that has for almost 50 years. It plays a major role in expanding heritage legislation worldwide and by identifying and promoting the protection and a growing list of the world's most unique sites, both cultural and natural. Today, however, this instrument is becoming a victim of its own success. Our World Heritage seeks to renew the original spirit and mission of the World Heritage Convention by engaging citizens, civil society groups, and professionals, also academics organizations. Our World Heritage Sustainability team, with the motto, our sustainable heritage, World Heritage Conservation as more as motto, our sustainable heritage, World Heritage Conservation as a most sustainable form of development, has organized an intensive month of debate on sustainability and heritage, illustrating the challenges and solutions for integrating heritage and sustainable development to explore the key concepts and sustainability in World Heritage: people, planet, prosperity, and peace. We will explore how development processes can be reconfigured to reflect the contribution of heritage conservation in a more sustainable form of development, grounded in outstanding universal value, managed with transparency, dialogue, and understanding. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this month-long debate features events addressing the themes of heritage interpretation, landscape, indigenous heritage, heritage and climate change, heritage as social capital and participation, alternative economic and governance models, and heritage and youth, as well as a wide selection of case studies to provide insight and lessons from practice. The debate will lead up to a major global event and conference on the future of the World Heritage in April 2022, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. This specific session will focus on climate change, one of the most significant risks for World Heritage sites worldwide. There is an urgent need to understand the ways climate threatens various sites and to understand what adaptation strategies, if any, are appropriate to their conservation. The iconic character of World Heritage sites is an important asset for raising public concern and enthusiasm, and therefore building up support to take preventive and precautionary measures for adapting to climate change. Furthermore, World Heritage sites often embody age-old solutions to support climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. This session aims at raising awareness about the impact of climate change on World Heritage and emphasizing the role of culture and heritage in addressing the challenges of climate change and building more locally empowered, just, and resilient society. But we have more qualified speakers to address those issues in our webinar today, a webinar that will be where we will welcome 6 speakers coming from all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let us maybe start by giving me the opportunity to give the floor to our first speaker, Cyril Kormos. Cyril Kormos is the founder of Executive Director of Wilder Heritage and also serves as IUCN WCPA Vice Chair for World Heritage. He was at Louis Walton Innovators Fellow at Conservation International from 2016 to 2018 and became a National Geographic Explorer in 2018. Cyril is also a co-founder of the steering committee for Intact with the A capital, of course, meaning International Action for Primary Forests, a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Primary Forest Tax Team, and a member of the Executive Committee of Wild Europe. Cyril has edited several books, including a handbook on international wilderness, law and policy, and has also published extensively in scientific and policy journals. Apart from Cyril, we'll have 5 other speakers that I'll be introducing as we go. And these are Dr. Fanny Duvert, Dr. Ishalosen Odiawa, Dr. Pascal Taruvinga, Scott Herron, and Kagosi Mwamulowe. So Cyril, if you wish, you may take the floor for about 10 minutes to introduce us on your speak, then you'll give us the title and share with us your worldwide experience. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I will be giving a little bit of background on the climate change and biodiversity nexus, and then giving some sense of the upcoming theme on climate and biodiversity that will be coming in August. So this is a very, very brief introduction and so to provide some sense of what we will be covering in a few months. I'll share my screen now, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, great. So a brief introduction to what's coming very shortly. This is a picture of Tikal National Park in Guatemala, just to give a sense of some nature culture linkages. But as I said, what I'd like to do is to give a sense of where we are in the biodiversity and climate crises very quickly, and the link between these two crises, which is absolutely essential, and then to see the role of World Heritage in combating these two crises, and a quick snapshot of where we will be in August. So the very, very quick message, and I'll try to move quickly here because we only have 10 minutes, is that we're running out of time very, very quickly on climate change. The frightening thing is that we need to be at net zero in terms of carbon dioxide emissions by mid-century, and we essentially have a carbon budget of less than 10 years of annual emissions within which we must get there. So we have roughly 10 years of emissions left that we can spread out over the next 30 years. And during that time and with that budget, we must get down to net zero emissions. And the problem is we are not making very quick progress to getting to net zero. This graph shows the big task ahead on how steeply the emissions need to fall if we're going to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which would generate catastrophic impacts. And what I would add here is that right now we're only at about 1.1, 1.2 degrees of warming, and we are already seeing catastrophic impacts. So 1.5 may actually be too high, judging from the fires, the droughts, the impacts on coral reefs, et cetera, et cetera. So the short message is time is running out. These climate change threats are severely impacting World Heritage sites. World Heritage climate change is already impacting about 1/3 of World Heritage sites. I think that number will go up very quickly. It's also the most serious risk for World Heritage sites as a future threat. And I think that those numbers will continue, unfortunately, to rise. The same is true for the Biodiversity Convention. What we are seeing is that we are not achieving the results of the convention. Biodiversity continues to be in very steep decline. High extinction rates, much, much higher than normal. Many more species on the brink of extinction. Population collapses, losing huge numbers of mammals. It's a dire crisis, and unfortunately, like climate change, also accelerating. And the message from IPBES, the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, is similarly, we are not on track, and this is a problem. So this slide is from the IUCN World Heritage Outlook, looking at threats to World Heritage sites globally, and as you can see at the very top, climate change, severe weather is the top threat. Now, what I'd like to emphasize here is that climate change is the top threat to World Heritage sites, but the threat of extractives and the degradation and destruction that may happen within World Heritage sites also contributes very significantly to climate change, because ecosystems contain a lot of carbon, and when there is degradation from infrastructure projects or logging or other extractive industries, those activities generate CO2 emissions and make climate change worse. So the point here is that climate change is impacting World Heritage sites, and at the same time, the poor governance of existing World Heritage sites contributes to climate change. So the point that I think many people are not fully aware of, and that needs to be made, is that ecosystems contain a huge amount of carbon, and that carbon needs to be contained within those ecosystems and left there. There is more than enough carbon in ecosystems to trigger catastrophic warming, to get us beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, if that carbon is released as carbon dioxide, even if we get off of fossil fuels and we transition to renewable energies. So the risk of releasing, sorry?
Will it be possible to put it in projection mode, in presentation mode?
Oh, I'm very sorry. Yes.
No, it's okay, no problem. Okay.
Yes, better. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, so the you know, even if we make a transition to renewables, if we continue to release carbon dioxide from ecosystems, we will still risk catastrophic warming and more than 1.5 degrees C of warming in the next few decades. So the key point here is that climate change impacts world heritage. Degradation of world heritage sites worsens climate change, and so there is a direct relationship between loss of biodiversity and climate change becoming worse. And that important connection was characterized and summarized in a very important first ever joint report between the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So from the Biodiversity Convention and the Climate Convention. So recognizing this important linkage. But the other part of the message is that while ecosystem degradation can accelerate climate change, maintaining ecosystem integrity, protecting ecosystems that still are intact and have all their plant and animal species can do the opposite. It can help fight climate change and make the situation better. So although we can be in a spiraling decline where climate change and biodiversity loss make each other worse, they can also be in a mutually reinforcing upward combination where we help get ourselves out of the crisis that we are in today. And the point is that an ecosystem that retains its integrity, that retains all of its plant and animal species and its vegetation structure, maximizes ecosystem service benefits. It will store more carbon, it will protect more species, it will provide cleaner fresh water, it will regulate fresh water flows more effectively. It will do all the things that nature does generally, but it will do them better, and it will maximize those benefits. So this is a fundamentally important point. As we protect and restore ecosystem integrity, we increase the ecosystem services that those ecosystems provide. So this is an important point because ecosystem integrity is in fact already recognized and integrated into the World Heritage Convention as one of the 3 pillars, of course, of outstanding universal value. So this convention is actually uniquely situated to address this precise problem of the nexus between biodiversity loss and climate change. The other point here is that, of course, many World Heritage sites, especially in the marine side, but also on the terrestrial side, are very large. And so the bigger the site and the more ecosystem integrity it has, the more carbon it stores in the long term. And not only does it store more carbon, but it stores the carbon more safely because the ecosystem is larger and more resilient, which means that the ecosystem is less at risk from fire or pest outbreaks, or climate change or drought or other things. So it's better able to resist stress. So the basic point is that World Heritage sites are under extreme threat. They are from climate change, but also from a range of industrial, extractive, and infrastructure projects. And this is all over the world without exception. But if we improved governance, if we strengthened management of World Heritage sites, World Heritage sites could play a key role in the solution, in protecting biocultural heritage, in fighting climate change, and mutually reinforcing those two so that both are improved together. So the task is to improve this governance and to improve management. In the Outlook report, what we found was that a slightly higher percentage of sites were maintaining their outstanding universal value, but only about half of sites were well protected. Only half showed that protection and management was in good condition, and that's far too low. That whole circle needs to be green, or the very large majority of it. So there's much work to do to improve the governance and protection and management of these World Heritage Sites if we want to escape these two crises of biodiversity and climate change. And just to leave you very quickly with a very strong quote from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction about the need to improve governance to address these twin threats that we're facing. I won't read it, but it's there. And very quickly, just to wrap up, I won't read all of this either. It's too long a list, but this is a sense of the different themes that we will be addressing in August during our symposium. Again, trying to characterize very clearly both the threat from climate change and the role of World Heritage Sites in contributing to climate change if they are poorly managed, but the potential for World Heritage Sites to help solve the crisis if they are well managed and if we create more World Heritage Sites in the right places. So I've probably gone over time, but I will leave it there, and thank you very much for your attention.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Kormos. I think that if there are three things that we can take from your extremely insightful presentation is that we are fast running out of time to address climate change. And that's a global, it's a quite alarming statement. But we also pick from your presentation that the main threat to world heritage and biodiversity is from climate change, but also that world heritage has the potential to mitigate, anyway, to play a role as mitigation in the solution for climate change issues. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So please be on the lookout because colleagues, attendees, participants, you may use the question and answer button at the bottom, but also start interacting with the different panelists through the chat box so that when we open the session for debate, then we can really have more interaction. Thank you very much again, Cyril. Our next presenter is Dr. Fanny Duvert. Dr. Fanny Duvert will talk to us about local communities' adaptation to climate change in marine World Heritage Sites. Dr. Duvert is currently leading UNESCO's World Heritage Marine Program, overseeing the conservation of more than 50 iconic ocean places in the world on the World Heritage list. Since she took office in 2010, meaning 11 years ago, Marine World Heritage has transformed into a global network of flagship marine protected area that today spans across 37 countries, from the tropics to the pole. She serves as UNESCO's lead advisor on ocean World Heritage dossiers, ranging from Australia's Great Barrier Reef, the sandbardens in Bangladesh, to the endangered vaquita in the Gulf of California in Mexico. In June 2018, Dr. Duvert led UNESCO's negotiation toward the successful removal of the Belize Barrier Reef from the list of World Heritage in danger. Few months ago, she led UNESCO science work illustrating that marine World Heritage hosts over 20% of the world's blue carbon assets. Previously, Dr. Duvert was responsible for UNESCO's first global assessment of the impacts of climate change on UNESCO World Heritage listed coral reefs. And it works on World Heritage in the high seas in 4 years ago and 4 or 5 years ago. Dr. Joubert, you are very much welcome to take the floor to share with the audience your insight about a community, local community adaptation mechanism when it comes to marine site. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, everybody. So I have a couple of general points that I would like to share with you, which are reflections from the overall work that UNESCO and World Heritage is doing in the field of climate change. And then I will share some thoughts and best practices or illustrations of how we are at the Marine Program dealing with climate change, and especially with helping local communities to build resilience on the ground. So on a couple of general points, as the former speaker Cyril pointed out very clearly, and which was reflected in IUCN's outlook, climate change is today by far the defining issue of our generation. But when it comes to World Heritage, it is very clearly the principal impact across all natural World Heritage sites. So there are today 252 natural World Heritage sites among over 1,000 World Heritage sites in general. And as IUCN launched last year in December, climate change has grown as the overarching issue. So when it comes to UNESCO as a whole, UNESCO has over 30 programs that are today dealing with climate change on a variety of topics. It also has established in 2020 a reflection group that specifically deals with climate change and culture, and which might be interesting for the group that is listening today. And I'm more than happy to connect you with the colleagues that are specifically dealing with that. Now, when it comes to World Heritage specifically, and again, more on a global scope around climate change and World Heritage, the World Heritage Center has been leading for the last 3 years a revision of its 2007 climate change policy. And that new policy is being presented at the forthcoming 44th session of the World Heritage Committee, which is starting on 16 July and is running until 30 July. So this new climate change policy is not just for natural World Heritage, covers all World Heritage, and it basically was developed through a major year-long global stakeholder involvement. And it brings all of the different aspects together when it comes to climate change. And it especially also links it, of course, to the global targets as they were established under the Paris Agreement. One of the critical things, and that comes down to the thoughts that I want to share with you on marine World Heritage. One of the critical things that came out of the climate change policy is that the effects of climate change are becoming increasingly visible. And with that, the cost of managing these World Heritage sites, whether they're cultural sites or natural sites, is becoming increasingly expensive. And as a lot of sites already chronically dealing with being underfinanced or understaffed, this is becoming an increasingly critical problem. And that was very clearly illustrated through all the consultations on the climate change policy and its development. A second very important thing that came out in the consultation rounds and the preparations for the climate policy is that one of the principal obstacles and challenges to deal with climate change, whether it's at the local level, the regional level, the national level, or the global level, is the lack of human resources and financial resources. Now, that would not necessarily come as a surprise, I think, to any of us, but it is, however, very telling that even when it comes to the world's flagship protected areas, both cultural and natural, that the lack of financial and human resources to protect these sites from the effects of climate change, while at the same time seeing increasing costs across the globe, that we're definitely on a path that is not efficient and not effective, especially as the former speaker also pointed out, the world wishes to move toward 1.5 degree and has made those commitments, at least under the Paris Agreement, to move towards a 1.5 degrees target. But already today, with a 1.2 target, as many scientists illustrate, we're currently at 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial times. We actually today already see a lot of those changes within those natural World Heritage sites, and some of them, as you likely have seen, have hit the press quite substantially in the past week. So these are very serious debates, and there are serious aspects at stake, but a lot of these changes we see already. So a few words on what we've been doing specifically when it comes to marine sites. So as the executive director said earlier, there are currently 50 ocean places across 37 different countries, which are on the World Heritage List, and they're spread basically very geographically across the globe. And we have sites in the Arctic, sites in the tropics, pretty much everywhere where there's oceans. I would say it's quite representative. And one of the interesting points that got revealed very recently when we launched a new study in March through UNESCO and a team of international climate and ocean scientists was that while marine World Heritage sites cover only about 1% of the globe's ocean surface, in fact, less than 1% of the globe's ocean surface, they actually represent or host 20% of the world's blue carbon assets. So blue carbon assets, for those of you who are not familiar with them, they're mangroves, they're sea salt marshes, and they're seagrasses, and they have a similar function as we see forests on land. So while representing less than 1% of the ocean surface, this 50 marine World Heritage sites cover actually 1/5 of all the blue carbon assets on our planet. So that's incredible. And again, as the former speaker pointed out, what is critically important to understand here is that when these sites are well protected, they can store and they fulfill that function of storing billions of tons of emissions. Yet when they are not well protected and when they are degrading, as we see unfortunately in many of those marine World Heritage sites, they can also release billions of tons of emissions and through that contribute significantly to the future warming of our planet. So those are very, those are very important, but are in fact critical aspects if we see what is currently happening already under a 1.2 degree increase in comparison to pre-industrial times. And I think last week's or this week's heat waves and the heat dome that everybody is talking about now, the wildfires that are happening in those forests, that makes actually that when we have those wildfires in forests increasingly more, those carbon assets cannot fulfill their storage, emission storage functions. So meaning that actually those in the ocean become increasingly important in the overall moving towards a still livable planet, I would say, for both biodiversity and the human race, and the protection, of course, of our critical natural and marine World Heritage sites on the World Heritage List. Now, a couple of final points, which brings us to how we work with local communities. UNESCO published in 2017, in fact, it was led by one of the speakers that is coming next, Dr. Scott Herron, who worked together with a team of international scientists and looked at the impacts of climate change on coral reefs. Now, coral reefs are some of the most fragile ecosystems, not just within World Heritage sites, but across the globe. And it's one of the reasons, actually, coral reefs was the protection of coral reefs was one of the reasons that the Paris Agreement actually suggested to include a 1.5 degree, because it's commonly scientifically proven that coral reefs cannot survive beyond a 1.5 degrees target or temperature above pre-industrial times. And of course, coral reefs are different in different parts of the world, but commonly it is expected that World Heritage sites, coral reefs in World Heritage sites, under a business as usual scenario, climate emission scenario, would actually bleach twice a decade already by 2040 for the most part. So when a coral reef bleaches is twice a decade, and it starts to become a annual or biannual phenomenon, then a reef just simply does not have the time anymore to recuperate from that and restart. Because when a coral reef bleaches, it doesn't necessarily die. It could recuperate if it is resilient and healthy, and if the water cools down fast. Yet if that happens too quickly, one after the other bleaching event, it doesn't have that time anymore. So we're at the time today where all 29 coral reef systems on UNESCO's World Heritage list do have that projection under a business as usual emissions scenario. Now, we run 3 different emission scenarios. One that we would actually look at the world not moving beyond a 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. And there it becomes very clear that actually the large majority of coral reefs would not have any major effects and would become would stand the test of time in warming. So finally, and to conclude,
yes, okay, thank you very much.
To conclude, so one of the big initiatives that we've started with an international team is to now build resilient or assist communities in 4 pilot coral reefs. And we have chosen to use the Resilient Cities model that was led by the Rockefeller Foundation and had a $500 million investment, but to appoint in 4 of those initial pilot sites what we call chief resilience officers. So they're local people that are recruited, and their task is to bring all of the different partners together, whether it's businesses, tourism, local communities, whomever, to bring them together and to build a climate adaptation strategy to basically make sure that we're not just looking at the environment, we're not looking at the coral reefs alone, but we're actually building resilient communities, because that change that everybody talks about, actually that change is already very much now there, and it impacts the livelihoods, and it impacts also very much the financial prosperity and resilience of these communities. So all of that, you can find more information on the website, and I'm also happy to contribute and to put you in contact with colleagues for further information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joubert. I think thank you very much for that extremely rich presentation, and where we can pick, let's say, 2, 3 key things, I think, among others. The first one is that the impact of climate change on World Heritage sites is increasing and even becoming critical, if I can even add, maybe alarming. That's something that quite came out very strongly from your presentation. The second thing is that the global warming is also ringing bells, and there are a lot of initiatives going on at local level by various communities, by different working groups as well. But those initiatives are also suffering a little bit from the lack, if I can say, of human and financial resources, and not enough. I'm sure that our participants, our panelists, will more interact by using the question and answer button, which is down there. You see that there are already few questions, one from EGA that is addressed to all panelists. Maybe we can also engage some debate, parallel debate there or discussion there as a way to enrich the overall discussion that will be then open at the end of this session. I would like to thank you again for your presentation and for having enlightened us about climate change and some initiatives by communities and different groups to address that specific issues. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Dr. Ishandozen Odiawa. She will be talking to us about the role of culture and heritage in climate action. It looks like we are shifting from nature to culture, but if we understand that heritage is global and is only us practitioners who then divide culture and heritage, we will understand that Dr. Ishan Lozen Odiawa, who is one of the well-known specialists in this matter, has more than 20 years experience in the heritage sector in Africa and beyond. As a trained architect, her doctoral research at the Université de Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne in Paris, of course, examined architectural conservation in the West African savanna from pre-colonial to post-independence area. Her career path has included university teaching at the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University in Nigeria, program management and consultancy with various institutions such as the Center for Heritage Development in Africa, CHEDA, which is based in Kenya, UNESCO, World Bank, World Monument Fund, African Development Bank, of course, with the African World Heritage Fund as well. She's a well-rounded heritage and the development professional with a good grasp of the economic, social, and environmental factors that ultimately impact heritage conservation. Dr. Diowa is the overall coordinator of the third round of periodic reporting exercise in Africa, and I can say I could testify that as lead of that exercise, she provided the leadership needed to make it completed for the first time at 100% rate by all African site managers and focal points. Dr. Diowa, you have the floor to give us your reflection and thought for about 10 minutes on your topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Swaibu. Good day to everybody, wherever you happen to find yourself in the world. So I'm going to quickly take us through the role of culture and heritage in climate action. First of all, as Fanny has just referred to, the recent heat dome that we're all talking about in British Columbia shows us that climate change is real. And what is interesting is that the reality is that some of the affected groups are First Nations in that part of Canada. However, we do not yet know what cultural heritage has been affected, but it is clear that their relationship with their environment will be affected due to the recent weather and climate events. Climate change is one of the many factors that threaten cultural heritage around the world. Yet cultural heritage is an important aspect of climate solutions if we only take advantage of it. Climate action is outlined in SDG 13 as countries are urged to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. ICOMOS's work on the intersection of climate change, culture, and heritage is presented in its 2019 report, The Future of Our Past, Engaging Cultural Heritage in Climate Action. The report aligns both with the SDGs and specifically correlates with the Paris Climate Agreement. And it is the product of collaboration between specialists from both the climate science and the heritage sectors. It identifies the gaps between culture and climate change and makes a call to raise our ambition and mobilize various sectors of the global community to understand how climate change either affects the heritage they work or live in, and the role of heritage in climate work. So my presentation will broadly follow the general outline of that report. So when we talk about the fact that culture, that there is an intersection between culture and climate action, we also must recognize that culture and heritage are assets for climate action, because cultures and cultural heritage around the world, and cultural practices, around the world, are reservoirs of experience and knowledge accumulated over time, over centuries in many cases, and yet they remain an untapped asset for developing adaptation and mitigation solutions. Interdisciplinary studies of past cultural adaptation to paleo-environmental, climatic, and landscape changes can be used to set baselines and identify the tipping point on past evidence-based scenarios. So the climate, the Paris Agreement starts off with what we call a high ambition in terms of using climate communication, climate, and so on. It requires that we address the cultural heritage. When we take that into the context of cultural heritage, what does it mean when we move from the UNFCCC or with the Paris Agreement into the cultural sector? It will require that we address the cultural heritage dimensions of climate communication, research, and education. This could involve the use of iconic places, such as World Heritage Sites. And I think that's that responds a bit to Ege's question in the chat. Using World Heritage Sites to communicate the significance of climate change impact on heritage places. In terms of research, heritage sites offer the opportunity for the physical sciences and humanities to use science, indigenous or traditional knowledge systems, and the history of those places to track past interactions with and effects on environment. It also research on heritage sites will also help us to assess the climatic, environmental, and social baselines to support climate science and expand our knowledge of short-term and long-term environmental change at local, regional, and global levels. Right now, ICOMOS is partnering with other global partners, including the university that is represented, that Scott Herron works at, on the piloting of the Climate Vulnerability Index methodology at two iconic sites, World Heritage Sites in Africa, Nigeria and Tanzania. Under high ambition again, to develop broad-based understanding of the issues, we need to use heritage education, climate change and heritage education to avoid misinformation. It is important that education and knowledge exchange across a wide range of stakeholders, including heritage managers, climate scientists, and traditional holders of knowledge, to use that, to bring them together to develop knowledge systems and education tools to address climate change. This would require that we integrate cultural heritage management with climate science in policy development to create synergies between heritage-based knowledge and climate change policy at various levels, national, state, regional, and local levels. It is expected that such synergies would enhance the understanding of the contribution of heritage to society and the impacts of climate change on heritage places and values. The Paris Agreement also speaks to the need for us to have adaptation strategies, which aim to minimize the adverse consequences of actual or expected climate change and to maximize the opportunities. Traditional knowledge systems, including agricultural adaptation, such as the utilization of alternative environments or the adoption of more resilient crops, feed into climate smart agriculture policy. In this picture, you see the elderly man to your left. That is Mr. Yakuba Sawadogo of Burkina Faso. His example readily came to my mind when it came to this issue of heritage and climate change action. He has adapted a traditional agricultural technique from his own culture, the Zay, to grow a forest in his region and to slow down the desertification in that part of West Africa. For him to achieve this, he had to have both the knowledge and the understanding of his ancestral practices. Cultural heritage can thus support adaptation when we take cultural values and we incorporate them into adaptation governance. These values can also guide adaptation options and bolster the enabling conditions for values-based approaches. We can use data collection, aspects of heritage management to support effective adaptation. We can also use heritage monitoring to support effective adaptation. We must also recognize the role of heritage in supporting disaster risk management. And while there might, and the reality also in many of our countries is that the agencies that manage disaster risk reduction are often disconnected from those that manage climate change adaptation. So how do we begin to work at national levels to ensure that these agendas intersect in one way or the other? The next item we will be looking at is about mitigation. Mitigation, in mitigating against, in taking climate action to mitigate against climate change, we understand that traditional patterns of social organization, often developed over centuries, are being supplanted today by the contemporary methods. The way we live today, we're always in a hurry, we're changing a lot of things very quickly. However, we're also losing that knowledge, and yet that knowledge is knowledge that can be used to better mitigate some of the future impacts of climate change. In the picture here, you have you have a demonstration from India. The communities are the site of the river island of Majuli in the Brahmaputra river. And this site is actually on India's tentative list for World Heritage. These communities have been living with and adapting to changing water levels for centuries. Historic, and they have a building method of using portable building techniques. As you can see, they build on stilts, and they can move their buildings according to the way the water levels rise in their landscape. So we can also be informed from such building techniques to develop lightweight materials as we strive to achieve SDGs. Okay, my timer has gone off, so I know I have a few more minutes, so I'll just rush through now.
Yeah, please, you can wrap it, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My timer just informed me that I have no more time. Then finally, we have the loss and damage, the non-economic losses, the fact that we are seeing this in the small island developing states of the Pacific, that there is a huge risk, in some cases, of total loss. How do we manage that and also integrate the knowledge of cultural heritage, as some communities will definitely have to move from one place to the other. Finally, let's come back again to where we're starting from, World Heritage. Currently, the World Heritage Committee, within the World Heritage System, we have the third periodic cycle reporting cycle that is ongoing. 2 regions have currently presented their reports. One is the Arab states, where 15 of 17 states parties have actually highlighted the need to strengthen the resilience to natural hazards and climate change. In the Africa region, climate change and severe weather effects is one of the top 5 factors affecting World Heritage properties in this region. And so the urgency to address the issues related to loss of heritage, loss of identity, loss of sense of place related to not just World Heritage, but to people at the local levels is primordial at a time like this. And we are living witnesses to the realities of our times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ishan, for this extremely rich presentation where you show us that culture and heritage are assets for climate actions, and that you have cultural resources that can be used, to address climate change issues. And you give us a number of examples of all over in different places in the world. You also insisted on the tools being knowledge, being science, being technology, that at World Heritage sites can also be used to address climate change issues. I would like to thank you very much again. I would like to remind our participants attending that the question and answer button is open, and then we can engage with our panelists as they are delivering their messages, about the topic of this meeting. And one question that maybe can also come is how culture can really be used, as a tool to mitigate and even adapt more mitigation, the effect of climate change. And you can also enrich the debate with your own experience from wherever you are following this discussion in the world. Thank you very much, Dr. Odiowa. Our next panelist is Scott Herron from James Cook University. Scott Herron is, of course, an environmentalist, a physicist whose research focus is on coastal and nearshore environments, and his research also involves the synthesis of physical information with the ecological, biological, and chemical characteristics of the environment. He is an associate professor in the College of Science and Engineering at James Cook University in Australia, and associated with the NOAA Coral Reef Watch Program in USA. Scott's research includes investigation of impacts on coral reefs, reef resilience, and conservation management within the context of climate change. Scott is a co-lead developer of the Climate Vulnerability Index, CVI, a tool that rapidly assesses climate vulnerability of World Heritage properties and other protected areas, which involve working with the UNESCO World Heritage Center and its advisory bodies, as well as various collaborators. Scott's presentation, will be a video that you can see, we'll just watch it, listen to it, and then interact probably at the end. Thank you very much. The video may be on. Dr. Jupila. Thank you. We cannot hear, I cannot hear any sound. Maybe you can leave, if you can hear the sound, maybe you can leave your mic open, I don't know. Okay.
You'll see here that this work is also in conjunction with my colleague and collaborator, John Day, with whom I've developed the Climate Vulnerability Index. And this is a tool that looks at climate risk to both natural and cultural world heritage. Climate change has become a threat and is recognised by a number of agencies as a key threat to heritage all around the world. And we see that unveiling in extreme temperature events, glacial melt, we see storm impacts, flooding impacts, wildfires, and intense rainfall events in different World Heritage properties shown here around the world. Some years ago, John and I took upon the challenge to develop a tool to rapidly assess climate vulnerability, because it was clear and evident that there was no tool that would undertake to do this and examine, therefore, the risks to World Heritage, natural, cultural, and mixed. But this tool had to be consistently applicable to all types of World Heritage properties. It needed to be systematic, but not too complex. And it certainly needed to be proactive, because we cannot wait for the impacts of climate change to happen before we act in this space. The tool needed to be able to put climate impacts into context, understanding that there are other threats that World Heritage properties face. And so we brought this together in the Climate Vulnerability Index, the CVI, which is a values-based, science-driven, community-focused, rapid assessment tool. Values-based. The first part and the foundational element of the CVI process is to determine the key World Heritage values. And these are derived from the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value for a particular property. However, we also note that there are values for a property that are not listed in the Statement of OUV. And it's important to have these documented and recognised, because climate change is almost certainly affecting these other significant property values as well. To give you one example from a CVI analysis undertaken, this is for the natural property of Shark Bay, Western Australia, where this list of 13 different key values was identified by the project team and the project partners for this application. A key note, though, was that one of these, seagrass, was deemed to be of higher priority in terms of a value because it was foundational and underpinned several of the other values. For example, in ensuring the hypersaline waters and the existence of the stromatolites, in providing food and habitat for marine turtles and dugongs. The CVI approach is science-driven. The initial framework was based on the IPCC vulnerability approach. And you see that diagram here where exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity are assessed. And those elements are incorporated to provide a measure of the potential impact and the assessment of vulnerability. We modified this approach by looking specifically at the vulnerability of the outstanding universal value, the OUV vulnerability. And we look at key climate change stresses that affect the natural and or cultural values. We apply some modifiers to bring tighter focus to the exposure and sensitivity terms. However, we also found that it was important not just to look at the property, but look at the community associated with that property. And so through this, we analyse economic, social and cultural connections, our ESC terms. And through those assessments, we derive a measure of the community vulnerability impacted, potentially impacted by a loss of OUV. And all of this together is our climate vulnerability impact framework. Again, it's science-driven because we look at a series of climate stresses that can impact upon natural and cultural heritage. And so here, this list is compiled. 15 of these climate stresses have colours because we found that they were relevant for a large number of World Heritage properties. However, there is space within the CVI approach to also include other context-specific or property-specific stresses. And you'll see on the right-hand side that we include analyses of historical climate variables as well as future projections of those climate variables. Values-based, science-driven, community-focused. As I mentioned earlier with the framework, we include an analysis of the community vulnerability. And we do this by considering the economic connections. So these are the business types directly associated with the property. We look at social aspects for folks who have interacted with the property. And we also look at cultural connections, and this does not necessarily involve an interaction with the property. For each of these, we assess the dependency, the future potential effect of the key climate stresses and the loss of World Heritage values on each of these components, as well as the adaptive capacity. The capacity that is held now by those businesses or by those people groups to adapt in the face of a loss of World Heritage values due to the key climate stresses. We use a risk matrix approach to link these assessments through the CVI framework. So some brief notes on what the CVI does. It does provide a broad assessment. It does consider key climate stresses, and it examines the World Heritage property as a whole. Importantly, it points to knowledge gaps or areas that require further investigation or communication with stakeholders. And it certainly is a great tool to raise awareness and issues that need to be considered in the future. It's also important to recognise the CVI doesn't do a deep dive analysis. It doesn't evaluate all of the climate stresses. It is a rapid assessment approach. And so it cannot undertake the detailed analysis of individual elements of a World Heritage property. It identifies but does not delve into new research areas. And it doesn't provide all solutions, but it does provide a rapid assessment of the climate vulnerability. To give you an example of some output from the process, for the Wadden Sea, 3 key climate stresses identified were the temperature trend, the extreme temperature events, and the sea level rise. And you can see there that assessments of the exposure, the sensitivity, the potential impact, the adaptive capacity of the OUV system were all assessed. And on the left-hand side, that culminated in an assessment of OUV vulnerability in the highest category, high. On the right-hand side, you can see the elements of the economic, social and cultural analyses. So the dependency, the future change in the ESC components, and then the adaptive capacity, the ability to respond now. And you can see that whilst the combined OUV vulnerability was in the highest category, the community vulnerability was mitigated by these a small degree of dependency and a moderate degree of adaptive capacity. And so that assessment made was moderate. To give some examples of the key climate stresses identified in some of the past applications, for Shark Bay, as mentioned, that analysis revealed these 3 key climate stresses. The cultural property in Orkney revealed one overlap in these 3 key climate stresses. For the Wadden Sea, the identified key climate stresses, this is another natural property that were identified as these. And for the Edinburgh cultural property, we had, again, a different grouping. So in each application, we've seen a different combination of key climate stresses identified and used in the CVI process. At the moment, we're working together with many partners on a CVI Africa project, and this has been funded by a UK government grant. And we're looking at 2 specific applications of CVI workshops in Tanzania and Nigeria. But more importantly, we're building capacity with those groups and through a training course with 6 trainees who applied for and were accepted into the training course. 6 among many applicants, I should point out. Finally, we have update newsletters on the CVI findings that we publish 3 times per year. And so the next one will be due later this month. We want to give acknowledgement to our many contributors and collaborators, our advisors, our funders. And for more information, we invite you to look at our CVI Heritage website. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share this with you. Bye now.
Okay, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Scott, for this quite insightful presentation about a tool. I will not make much comment because we are running a little bit late, but we can still say that this rapid assessment approach that is based on a value, science, and community rationale. And maybe it deserves to be tested more. Thank you very much. Let's then move to our last panelists, Mr. Kagosi Muamulowe and Dr. Pascal Taruvinga, who will be talking to us about how to value traditional knowledge as climate change technology with different experiences at various places in the world. Mr. Dr. Taruvinga has a doctoral degree in archaeology from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And he was, until quite recently, the Chief Heritage Officer for Robben Island World Heritage Sites in South Africa, where he stayed there for 8 years. He has extensive experience in museology, community programming, heritage tourism, strategic planning, capacity building, stakeholders management, liberation heritage, rock art, world heritage and conservation at different sites in Africa and beyond. An advocate for sustainable socioeconomic development and community participation at heritage sites, Dr. Karuvinga holds a PhD degree on stakeholders, conservation, and sustainable development. He's a member of several national and international heritage professional associations and committees, such as e-commerce and others. He also published a number of papers and heritage issues, and he has been, until very recently, the Chief Heritage Officer of Robben Island World Heritage Site in Western Cape, South Africa. I will maybe give the floor first to Dr. Karuvinga before, on the same topic, ask Mr. Mwamolowe, who is a very well-known scientist from all over, for Africa. I'm just looking for the biographical, maybe when I'm looking for it, Dr. Karuvinga, you have the floor to give us your thought for about 10 minutes before we ask Dr. Mwamolowe to come on board. Thank you very much. You have the floor. Your mic is muted.
Thank you very much, Swaibu.
Thank
and
you.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to colleagues. I think individuals know which salutation refer to them. And that's typical, the discussion that we are having here on climate change. It's not a single lane discussion. There are other multiple dimensions and factors that we need to take into consideration. And I was listening with interest all the presentations, and I've gradually come to an understanding that there is an inherent danger and risk of making climate change as a scientific, a science-driven process without considering the input of indigenous knowledge systems. And this is quite visible. Even when you look at the policy formulation, not just on climate change, but on heritage, so many heritage issues. IKS is at the periphery, and the communities are a secondary factor in this process. Even now in this meeting, we don't have a community representative. And what I've been asking myself is whether what science is pushing for in terms of mitigation and adaptation for climate change is what communities are looking for. For example, now people are talking about jobs, they're talking about food, they're talking about survival. They want those jobs, they want the industries to operate, and we are saying they are polluting the environment and all these things. So what I'm saying is no longer just a scientific issue, it's also a social issue. So climate change has to consider the social dimensions of climate change. And when you look at indigenous knowledge systems and climate change, one can easily understand that the whole process of mitigating and managing climate change is not a new phenomenon for indigenous communities at all. They have extensive experience in observing, collecting, and storing experiences with environmental changes. And we have to tap into that. That's the power and function of social memory. They have developed even strategies to recognize and cope with these changes, like what my colleague will be showing with one specific site. And the current discourse on climate change, including developing indicators, modeling, and terminology used, is treating IKS as a secondary factor. Yet local communities are key to this initiative. So we have to guard against what I'm calling a rocket science approach to climate change discourse. We have to really go back and involve communities and tap into their knowledge systems. And when you look at Africa, for example, as an example, hunting communities adapted to seasonal variability with successful outputs benefiting their cultures. for example, for their livelihoods, and helping them to make decisions to move from one place to another for their own benefit. So this was a short-term mitigation and adaptation to seasonal variability, which actually gave them long-term understanding of climate variability and the risks as observed from their own environment. The good examples of that is the Maasai communities in Tanzania, who have coexisted with the landscape for many decades and centuries. And the same applies to the Sani communities in sub-Saharan Africa, who equally have experience with environmental changes, and their knowledge and experience has helped them to continue with their daily lifestyles even today. And this includes their response with strategies like rain-making ceremonies and even changing their hunting patterns and the species that they would target for hunting. So there's a lot of information that is sitting there. And when you look at some of the World Heritage Sites, Great Zimbabwe and Mapungugu World Heritage Site in South Africa, they were abandoned due to prolonged droughts, signaling climate change. And this demonstrates systematic information gathering over a long period, culminating in the community taking major decisions to relocate to more favorable environments. This also demonstrates ability to observe and interpret changes using social systems and multiple factors for the benefit of community change. I would like again to repeat that climate change is no longer just a science issue, it's also a social issue for them. And when you look at this, in terms of conservation, even at World Heritage Sites, mitigation and adaptation has always been an issue. Sites have always been deteriorating, and communities have mastered the art and the experience of even selecting materials, construction techniques that are designed to create a resilience of their sites and systems that they're using at sites. So there is a merit in looking at indigenous knowledge systems and pushing for involvement in this process. UNESCO communities and climate-oriented organizations have to find both scientific and social solutions to this challenge. And going forward, I think it will be very simple, which is what I'm thinking. If you look at IKS, it's the basis of making decisions at the local levels. This is key to involving the victims of climate change. So we need to make local communities be part of the solution by tapping into their experience, which goes into centuries and over the last decades on the issue of climate change. And it's information that is existing, which is the second point. It's a generational blessing, implying that it's passed from one generation to another. So IKS to me is a capillary of useful information, experiences, and adaptation models. Like, for example, what was happening in Barossa cultural landscape, which you get to know just now from my colleague. And for example, again, in Uganda, there was a study that was done, and elders were able to recall and explain through memory climate events experienced from 1960 to 2011. Memory is an active source of information on climate change. They even recounted the interpretation of diseases, the intensity and the impacts. This includes harvests and yield patterns in relation to environmental changes. So IKS is beyond a single factor analysis. It is holistic and inclusive. And then the other point is that while IKS is not transferable from one community to another, it's important in that it connects or it creates a relationships between people and their environment. It's not going to change. Communities are not going to go anywhere, and the environment is going to remain as part of their context. So therefore, we need to look at it in a way that there are also live sources of information on what is actually happening on the ground, so that we don't operate from an abstract, from a global perspective, and then come with solutions that might not actually work on the ground. So we need to involve all these stakeholders in the process. And then, of course, when you look at IKS, it has got dimensions of weather forecasting, vulnerability assessment, adaptation, modeling, and creating resilience and these things. All these dimensions, they give meaning and relevance and acceptance of outcomes of the current climate change mitigation and adaptation. For example, if you look at sustainable development, it's not a new term in Africa, because communities were already practicing this sustainability through shifting cultivation, but the terminologies that were then used in the policies, they make these things look like foreign. So we are trying to say, let's work with the communities to infuse what we are thinking as scientists and give them a space to look at this. In conclusion, if you allow me, Chairperson, our Indigenous knowledge system demonstrates that mitigation and adaptation by local communities reduced their vulnerability to past climate variability and changes, and they even continue to do so today. And we need to involve local communities and IKS rather than impose solutions on local communities to avoid the rocket science approach. And also we have to look at key elements of IKS, which is observation, interpretation, decision-making, mitigation, and experiences, as well as ability to move towards resilience. And finally, Chairperson, climate change is about solving economic and the well-being of societies beyond conservation frameworks. So let's involve communities and let's tap into the Indigenous knowledge systems of communities. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarubinga. Climate change, thank you. You are correctly saying it is about saving life. And you ask us a quite disturbing question at the option of your remarks. Where are communities in this panel? Where are communities, local communities in our discussion? So the bottom-up approach that you brought up through the Indigenous knowledge system is a quite valuable methodology, or let's say operational framework to promote, maybe alongside the top-down approach that sometimes you call it a rocket science approach sometimes bring on the table. Thank you very much. I think we really have thought for discussion here. Thank you for your contribution. And you also call upon Kagosi, who is our next speaker, to bring up the, let's say, a ground-based experience at a Barossa cultural landscape. Dr. Kagosi is, as I was saying, a very well-known scientist and heritage practitioner, and that have quite been involved in a lot of development, scientific heritage conservation projects. He's currently the regional director of the Northern Region of the National Heritage Conservation Commission in Zambia, with more than, let's say, almost 30 years experience in heritage conservation and management. He has served in various portfolios as heritage experts, as a consultant experts with various organizations, African World Heritage Fund, UNESCO, IUCN, on World Heritage Convention matters. For instance, he was also a resource person being involved in capacity building initiatives in World Heritage nominations and risk assessment, as well as a lead expert in GAPA studies that were implemented in Africa and elsewhere. Dr. Kagosi is also a consultant in Zambia Environmental Management Agency on environmental impact assessments. That is one of the advocates of environmental impact assessment, and he thinks that that tool can really help to mitigate a lot of impact on World Heritage sites. He's the current president of the Ecosystem Biodiversity Adaptation for Food Security Assembly of Zambia Bureau. Dr. Kagosi is part of the expert team responsible for reviewing the policy on sustainable development in World Heritage, which was adopted by the UNESCO in 2015, and also he was part of the Ngorongoro African World Heritage Declaration of Sustainable Development document. That is to say that he has the relevant profile to bring us just a piece of his experience, and I hope that he'll be able to do that it may be 7 or 8 minutes so that we don't abuse on the patients, on the attendees. Thank you very much, Dr. Kagos. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Just a point of correction, I'm not a doctor, but otherwise, thank you very much for elevating me. My presentation is on indigenous knowledge and climate change in the Barossa floodplains cultural landscape in Zambia. In terms of the content, I'm looking at the Barossa floodplain and its heritage values, then the ecosystem contribution of the BPC, which is Barossa Plains Cultural Landscape, to climate change, then the view of the Lozi people on the Barossa floodplain, the indigenous laws of the Lozi in environmental protection as a contribution to climate change mitigation, and there will be a conclusion. What I'm showing you there on this screen is a map of Zambia, and the pink area is the western province where the Barossa cultural landscape is found, and the red outline is showing you the proposed Barossa cultural landscape area to be nominated, and the one in purple is the outside buffer. Going ahead, some of the values that have been looked at, or the criteria that is being argued by the state part of Zambia for the Barossa cultural landscape to be nominated as a awarded landscape, is that it bears a unique and at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition which is still living. Then criteria that is 4, be an outstanding example of a technological ensemble or landscape which illustrates significant stages in human history. Then criteria 6, be directly or tangibly associated with events and traditions and ideas and beliefs. This is just to show you some of the Barossa, that is the canals, which we are arguing that it's a network which you never find in any, that is a cultural landscape, rather in any floodplain. These are traditionally made canals. And that map is just showing you a network of some of the historic or major historic Barossa network canals, some of which were constructed during the 1800s. What you have there is still, that is an example of a technological ensemble of landscape. These are canals which are littered all over the landscape. Then criteria 3, which is bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition which is still living. What you have there is a depiction of the Komboka ceremony. This is a transhumance, that is an activity which takes place on an annual basis where the king and his people and the animals, they move from the lower, that is the lower areas to upper areas during the floods. Then on canals, we still have those photos showing us canals. Then the other criteria, that is 4 and 6, there is the idea of, the flood and the beliefs and the living tradition of burying chiefs or rather kings at the center of that is raised mound. That is just a map which the traditionalists came up with to depict the burial mounds of the kings. In this case, we are talking of 21 kings of the Lozis who have been buried in the floodplain, and that is a cultural practice which has continued. Now, what is the ecosystem contribution of the Barossa cultural landscape to plains cultural landscape to climate change? We are saying, and I'm saying, that there's a hydrological and drainage system where we've got a number of rivers which feed into the wetland, which is the hydrosphere. Then this percolates into the ground to feed into the geosphere. This fits into the supporting of the ecosystem, which is the biological system, which is grass, the marshlands, the papyrus, and the reeds, which is a biosphere, as already stated. Then we have the wildlife, such as migratory birds and other, that is a species of birds, making it an international bird area. So that is still a biosphere where we've got avian and terrestrial species. Then we've got fishes and other aquatic life, which is a biosphere, but forming the aquatic sphere. Then the aquatic, that is a system. Then we've got the human livelihood support, or the humans who are supported by the same from the socioeconomic point of view. So we've got human sphere. Then this whole system breathes and transpires into the atmosphere. This interaction results into change of wind behavior in terms of speed, direction, transpiration, evaporation, percolation, rainfalls, runoff, and river channel flows. So the Barossa floodplain is acting as a sponge that supports biodiversity and human life and controls climatic factors from a regional perspective. So the ecosystem contribution to the BPCL to climate change still continues. Studies have shown, as indicated in that source at the bottom, during the period 2003 and 2013, the inundation or the flooding extent has risen with a mean magnitude of 33 square kilometers. Then a significant downward change in the floodplain's inlet and outlet mean annual discharge occurred in 1981. Then based on the overall 1952 to 2004 discharge time series downward trend is being inferred that inundation extent is reducing. So here we can see, I'm just showing you the issues of climate, how it is being, the climate, how it's changing in the Barossa floodplain. Now, what is the view of the Lozi people on the Barossa floodplains? Whilst a flood is generally seen as a hazardous phenomenon through a lens of the enemy metaphor by an observer outside the Barossa culture, flooding is a welcome phenomenon seen through the fringe metaphor phenomenon by a native Barossa. What am I saying? You go to Yoruba flood myths of Nigeria, the Bakongo flood myths of the DRC Congo, that is Democratic Republic of Congo, a Koi flood myth of Niger and Nigeria, the Kaya flood myth of Tanzania, the Maasai flood myth of Kenya, the Mandingo flood myth of Ivory Coast, the Yoruba flood myth of Nigeria. You find that in all these, flood is looked at as a hazard, but the Barossa flood is seen as an opportunity. So, still on the contribution of climate change to mitigation. In terms of in this case, I would like to look at the law, and that the laws, the native law, national ordinances of the Lozi people that have guaranteed were guaranteed by a religious and cultural ethnic towards nature as an aspect of God's temple. A lot of prohibitions and are found in the ordinances, and these had a spiritual inclination to the Lozi indigenous religion, culture, and taboo. So in short, I want to present to you the traditional regulatory restrictions in terms of natural resource management, as we know that natural resource management, good natural resource management feeds into good, regulation or adaptation of climate change. So traditional regulatory restrictions are as follows: the preservation of game and fish. The Liua Game Reserve, today known as Liua National Park, was reserved as the Ritunga's sacred hunting ground. Killing of elephants, giraffes, waterbucks, statungas, and the hippos were only permissible by the Ritunga. So elephants and ivory were strictly vested in the Ritunga. The Ritunga was the sole authority in ivory trade. Every permitted hunter was required to pay a part of his spoil to the king as a tribute. Protection of bird life. Killing of the following birds was prohibited: egret, marabou stork, vulture, head-bellied stork. These birds were believed to be spiritual messengers from God, and that is in the case of vulture. Capturing a nesting bird nor taking its eggs was prohibited. Game traps and dangerous to people were prohibited. The use of any fire, lamp, flame, and torch in order to hunt any animal by dazzling it, attracting, or confusing it was prohibited. These were traditional methods of protecting the environment. Protection of fish or aquatic life. Killing fish by poisoning was prohibited. Fishing was restricted to fishing seasons as dictated by the flood cycle. Use of small-sized nets was prohibited. Overnight fishing in specified lagoons was prohibited for spiritual reasons, as lagoons, some of the lagoons were the resting places or where the penepharia of the dead kings were being dumped or put. Then the protection of forest resources and pastures and agricultural lands. Able-bodied persons or living in the villages were obliged, or it was a must for them to protect forests from fire. If you are found not to protect the forest from fire, you are going to be fined. Burning of grass in the woodlands and odd cultivation was to be done under the supervision of forest indunas, which are chiefs, after the end of August. Setting of fire or destruction of country plains, grass pastures and plant or herbs of any sort of in the forest or the valley or village, or destruction of any such non-trees was prohibited. The Litunga or the king in council declared to the public periods to set fire to the plains. People were accountable and responsible for controlling and putting out fire, which they started, which by spreading would cause damage. Citizens of Barozzi were to report to the nearest chief or Induna person who started the fire by accident or deliberately. So people, in terms of forestry management and agricultural lands protection, people were also accountable and responsible for controlling and putting out fires. Then establishing of new villages in the forest was prohibited.
Maybe you can start wrapping up.
Yes, so clearing of new gardens in the forest reserve, except in odd cultivation, was not allowed. Disobeying orders from the forest induna was an offense. Cutting down fruit-bearing trees was also prohibited. The law, in conclusion, the Lozi people have lived in harmony and interacted with the natural environment for more than 400 years. They have in the past managed their environment through traditional management system. Through their traditional management system, their heritage such as canals, king's burial sites have been preserved. Their indigenous knowledge systems have contributed to environmental protection and sustainability. Good environmental practices contribute to mitigating climate change. It is also important to note that the Lozi people have actually adapted what others call climate hazard. They are all lessons that we can learn from this climate adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kagosi Mwamolowe, who doesn't want to be doctor, even though what we are saying is very much doctoral. Thank you very much. I think what your presentation is an illustration of indigenous knowledge system, something that I don't like. I would rather call it traditional knowledge system as a mitigation adaptation mechanism faced to climate change issues. And that's extremely interesting. The whole resource management system and the whole set of, forbid and authorize features that lead the management of Barossa cultural landscape in Zambia is quite interesting, local-based experience that needs to be better known. Hence, I guess, the effort by the government of Zambia to put or to nominate this site as a World Heritage. Thank you very much. We are 10 minutes behind time, and I would maybe request your clémence, to use a French word, your understanding that we maybe take another 5 minutes to wrap up this meeting. There are 2 questions in the question and answer that I would like maybe each, if we have no other questions, I could see that we only have 2 questions in the chat box. So maybe one specifically is addressed to Dr. Taruvinga, the other one from Clarissa Gagliardi, who is questioning the non-scientific knowledge approach from the panelists, and also the general question that was asked by Ega about the use of iconic character of World Heritage Site and the media attention they can generate as a specific strategy to change attitudes and policies. Maybe I will give, if you don't mind, okay, I can see, yes, I'm shifting. So please consider the time, oh no, these are directing. Okay, so maybe if you, I don't know, there are last comments by the panelists. Kagosi, you may take off your presentation, please. Thank you very much. Before we wrap up this meeting in the next, let's say 5 minutes. Do you have last comment from the presentation from other panelists, also from the questions that have been put on the show? 1 minute from panelists just to wrap up. Thank you very much. Let maybe start with Kagosi, as you are on the floor. Okay, he's gone. With Cyril, okay, Cyril, you have the floor. You may then wrap up in less than 1 minute. Thank you very much.
Well, just to answer, well, first of all, thank you to all the other panelists for an excellent morning, at least morning for me. It was a wonderful series of talks. A very quick point, maybe just in response to Ega's question in the question and answer. Absolutely, we should be using World Heritage Sites to make broader points about climate change as truly iconic places that are of relevance and that matter to everyone. One thing we say in IUCN very often is that World Heritage Sites are clearly a litmus test, that if we fail with World Heritage Sites, then we will fail with conservation globally. If we can't protect the most exceptional, important places on the planet that matter to everyone, regardless of where they may live, then we have very little hope of maintaining the kinds of ecosystems and mixed sites that we need to keep this planet habitable. So they are central to this discussion, not only because of the direct effect they have, but also because indirectly they are fundamentally important places, and that we must succeed in. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm also happy to welcome you. Dr. Duver, if you have your concluding remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will respond to the same question as Cyril responded to. I do think, I feel very strongly that World Heritage Sites obviously can take a leading role in making the world aware of what's happening. Of course, we see the same effects in all, when it comes to marine sites, we see the same effects in all marine World Heritage Sites, and there are today probably 10,000 marine World Heritage Sites. Now, these 50 what we call flagship marine protected areas, I do think that UNESCO and its advisory bodies have that clout to bring people together, to convene people around certain of these topics. And I do think that the press and the world does still listen and care for these places. They also attract a lot of tourism. People feel connected to these sites because they visit those sites. It's in everybody's bucket list to visit some of these places. So I do feel very strongly that we should use that to the maximum extent we can. And obviously, local practices I think are critically important, because a lot of that knowledge is not really used broadly, but it can definitely move us forward in ways that we might not be thinking about. Science is critically important, but it's a lot of knowledge embedded in local and indigenous communities that I think we're not necessarily using as good as we can today. So I keep that as concluding remarks, and I thank you for the opportunity to listen to you and to share my thoughts with you, and I wish you the very best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fanny. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Dr. Ishalosen, maybe you can also give our concluding remarks, your concluding remark by also replying to those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just very quickly say that that World Heritage continues to represent an opportunity to make an impact in terms of some of the desired changes regarding management of heritage and heritage places. That being said, the role of the communities, the role of traditional knowledge of indigenous, depending on which where you are, it's called so many names, but we all know what we're saying. Cannot be put aside, discountenanced. However, also we also must recognize that maybe sometimes the lessons can be learned at the very small levels. Those sites that are not known, those sites that nobody has heard about, but which are also in the same vicinities as some of these iconic sites. So how can we create an atmosphere or an environment of cross-fertilization where the ones that are not World Heritage actually inform our management approaches to World Heritage, particularly with regards to the management of climate change impact. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ishan. Thanks a lot. I'll now give the floor to Kagosi, if he's available to give us his concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, moderator. I'd like to indicate that I'm very humbled by the various presentations that have been made, and I've been very much challenged, especially by the CVI presentation, and I'd like to have a presentation on the same, because I know it will contribute something to what I'm working on. I'm working on the Kasui tombs, the risk preparedness and climate change is one of the issues that I'm looking at. So that is something I would like to share with, but otherwise I want to say, thank you very much, moderator, for having moderated very well, and also the presentations that have been very much enriching, starting from Pascal, Ishan, and everybody else. I'm not mentioning the others because I don't want to misspell their English or Spanish or Brazilian names. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kagosi. Last but not least, Dr. Taruvinga, for your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Swaib. And thank you to colleagues, the panelists. I've learned a lot, and I think we are beginning to avoid doing things the same way, expecting a different result. And I think if we continue in this direction, we are likely to get better and different results. But having said that, I would want to speak like a politician. Thank you, Clarissa, for raising that point, that non-scientific knowledge. I think it's a matter that we should take forward in our discussions. But also as a politician, I know that we can use World Heritage sites as iconic places to influence decision makers. But my experience is that decision makers, they come and go after a few years. And what remains is the local communities, the stakeholders at the local levels of the sites. So I'm saying, okay, we can use that, the iconic status of the sites, but I think community-based advocacy is a powerful tool and an effective approach in this agenda. And I think we should seriously consider it. Even now, when you look across the globe, it's the communities that are, it's the people at the local levels that are even challenging governments and delivery services and everything else. So we just need to know how to tap into that power to push the agenda and get the support we need. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I think this is, it's really my pleasure it was my pleasure in the period to pay, if I can say, to facilitate this meeting. That I think two main outcomes from the meeting is that World Heritage is an opportunity, is definitely an asset for climate change. And the other thing is that I'm really taking myself as takeaway is that maybe we need to explore more indigenous knowledge systems in complement of the scientific approach that have been used to address climate change issues as a way to create sustainability. And that then gives me the opportunity to reiterate our collective thanking to all attendees to this meeting, all panelists for your insightful presentations, but also all our World Heritage our World Heritage Initiative sustainability team who make this possible. At the background, we have FLACAM, we have EGA, we have MAICA, we have a lot of people working in the background. Thank you very much for your support, and we hope that we'll keep watching, attending the upcoming event of our World Heritage Sustainability team. Thank you very much, and please enjoy your weekend and be watchful about this whole pandemic, which is still quite worrying in some of the regions in the world. Thank you very much. Further enjoy your day and your weekend. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.